everyone. Welcome to another Classic Movie Monday, and today I thought it would be interesting to dive not only back to the 80s, but also dive back into a Tom Hanks film that came out within the 80s. He definitely looks like a lot younger, at least back then. And it's probably one of his roles that was sort of a breakout performance for him, considering the fact that later on he would make films like Forrest Gump and Saving Private Ryan, or at least star in those films and do his acting work there. But basically, as you can see by the title and thumbnail, we're going to be talking about Big. Now, Big is a very interesting film, and it has something I think that can be relatable to both adults and children. And oftentimes within children's films, you do get a sense that even though there might be ways in which adults can find enjoyment out of children's films, it's not necessarily, I guess, geared towards them as far as plot-wise, character-wise is concerned. Whereas in this film, it almost tries to kind of blend the two, and in doing so, create something that is maybe a little bit more adult, in the sense that it's not really necessarily geared towards kids, although it does have a child being our main protagonist within the film. But at the same time, it also expresses a lot of adult circumstances and adult viewpoints of the world. So without further ado, let me sort of address a little what Big is about, so you kind of get an idea of where I'm drawing this kind of adult childhood perspective from. Basically, Big is sort of a very heartfelt look at a child ultimately being converted into an adult body. Usually you don't see films like that. Usually it involves people that switch bodies. It's not necessarily like somebody suddenly changes into an adult. Maybe they'll turn into maybe, I don't know, like a monster or, something. But usually we don't see this kind of a transitioning happening. But basically, our main protagonist, named Josh, was a 12-year-old boy who ultimately makes a wish to be big. And you'll sort of see the circumstances into why he decides to wish for that. And again, this is one of those stories where, you get what you wish for kind of a thing. Where, he actually does get his wish and his life is completely turned upside down. And basically when he wishes to be big, he becomes basically an adult. Probably a earlier 30s adult version of himself. And some people might consider this concept a little goofy. They might consider it like, how is this classic material? I mean, isn't it a little odd? Yes, it is fairly odd. But the way it showcases it and showcases the ultimate dilemmas that he ends up facing when he does ultimately get his wish, I think is very effective. And you usually don't see films like this who really delve into this kind of adult versus childhood issue a lot. Usually adulthood and childhood are kept fairly separate. And when they are put together, it's usually done for the sake of bringing wisdom into the child. Whereas here, it's sort of a complete life transition for him. And ultimately, Josh has to sort of end up choosing whether or not he wants to really stay an adult or if he wants to ultimately become his old self again. And this ends up coming, this dilemma ends up coming up too more so once he starts meeting new characters. He ends up working at this toy company. Um, and you'll see sort of the circumstances of how he ends up becoming part of the toy company. But at the same time, it's a very unique way and sort of even plausible way, if this scenario were to ever exist, how how it probably would have ended up. Um, having a basically a 30-year-old that's really a 12-year-old at a toy company or working for a toy company, and being very successful at it. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer why. But really, once he enters that life, that adult life of working, that adult life of responsibility, and also ultimately he ends up having a love interest named Susan later on within the film, and you'll sort of see how that too stacks up a lot of more complications as to, whether or not he wants to, ultimately go back to who he really is, which is a 12-year-old. And you'll sort of see too how there are people within his past life whom he misses dearly and, has a strong bond and connection with. And that's really at the heart of this film. This is really the focus. Um, this whole premise of adulthood versus childhood. And what I really think too really works well with this film is that the characters are really relatable. Like Josh does feel like a 12-year-old, and the way Tom Hanks plays him, you do feel like he is still kind of a little bit of a child. So you really do feel a sense of not only likability, but you feel sort of convinced throughout the film that Josh really is that 12-year-old inside, while at the same time kind of being conflicted into sort of growing up as the story continues. But the interesting thing too is I think not only do we not really see this kind of a concept within a lot of films, we don't see a lot of films that really do tackle such an odd concept so well. I mean, usually it falls fairly flat. If you were to tell me initially the plot of this movie, I would probably be like, what? How is this in any way, shape, or form memorable? But when you watch it, you see how memorable everything is. Just um, how much fun this film tries to be, and how it kind of displays this sense of innocence, but then at the same time reflects onto adulthood responsibility and obligations. And, you do feel like all of these things are being tied in. And the way the film ties everything in, it just works so well that I can't help but be kind of blown away by it in a way. And it's very touching too. I mean, you do feel for Josh's character. You do feel like that he is going through sort of this struggle, especially being in the circumstances that he's in that are very bizarre and strange. I mean, it's one of those stories where there's a very odd premise surrounding it, but regardless of the strangeness to it, it really works because it follows through on what it's trying to say as a film, I think. So that's why I think this film in particular is rather unique, and that's why I consider it to be a classic. And again, it was one of Tom Hanks's, big, I said the title of the film, big breakout sort of roles, especially if you look at his age. I mean, he looks fairly young in this film. And I'm sure there's other films within the 80s that he's done that are probably within his library that are previous to this film. But I think this one was in particular one that I think stood out to a lot of people initially when it came out. And I think it stood out to people, even later on. I remember a teacher at one point, I think, playing parts of the film for us. because I think he found himself really enjoying the film a lot, so he decided to put it on one day. So again, it just shows you the impact that this film sort of has. And I think there's a lot of reference to this film. I think a lot of people like to draw from this film. I mean, a lot of people, I think, remember the scene where he's playing on the big keyboard, and he's expressing that level of innocence. Um, so again, it just goes to show how um, how much how much of a weight childhood has uh, on the plot and on the characters, while at the same time the sort of importance of adulthood, but ultimately sort of, reflecting on as to where you actually are within life. So, and how that ultimately ends up making a whole lot of the difference. So, again, I think that's really something that's really not touched upon in a lot of films. And it's nice to see that this film did kind of dive into this area. Um, but I think that's really ultimately all I can say about it without really giving anything away. But if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I would be more than happy to answer them. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.